Welcome, guys. Well, Sondra, I want to start with you. You're being called a colonist. What does that say? What does it mean to you when people say that, like, to you?
When I hear the word colonist, I think about, Europe that went and colonized Africa, and I have no idea what it has to do with me because I'm a Jew. I was wrongfully driven from my land 2,000 years ago, and my people, no matter where we were, always yearned to come back to Israel, and so I came back. I'm not a colonist. I've come back to my own homeland.
But people will say, yeah, you came back, but the country belonged to someone else in that moment.
But it never did, because there wasn't a single sovereign nation established in that land of Israel since the Jews were exiled nearly 2,000 years ago.
Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. But first, I'd like to hear your story. How did you get to live in the land of Israel, in Judea and Samaria?
Well, I'm Jewish. I'm an Orthodox Jew, and from a very young age, studied the Bible. And as I got older, began to also study and understand the modern history of the state of Israel and realized how amazingly they went together. And as a Jew who believes in the Word of God, I'm saying, well, if God has brought the people of Israel back to the land of Israel, and I'm part of the people of Israel, I have to go. And so we went.
And you went from the States, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. We moved to Israel in 1984. I was married already, had 2 very small children. We had 3 more children in Israel. Now we have 12 grandchildren in Israel. But really, from the beginning, we were very attracted to the pioneering movement to settle the biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria.
And why is that you were so attracted to this kind of area?
Well, my connection to Israel, as I said, began with the Bible. And if you look at the Bible, almost everything that happens in the Bible is in Judea and Samaria, because that was the center of where the biblical people lived. The Jewish people during the biblical times lived primarily in Judea and Samaria. So this idea of returning to my own land and then returning to the very same place where Abraham walked and where Jacob walked and where King David fought, and it is just amazing. And add to that the fact that it is probably the most controversial part of Israel today, I felt this is a place where they need me.
Shmuel, you lived in Israel since a child.
Right.
But you didn't always live in the heartland, right?
Truth. I was born and raised in Netanya. It's a beautiful coast city and next to the beach, and it was great. But I really think that connecting to what Sondra just said, in life, usually you want to be in a place that you influence others, or you want to make something important with yourself. And I think living in Judea and Samaria is exactly that. From the age of 18, actually, I started my journey to the land. I started with a pre-army academy. Before the army, we have 3 years of mandatory army in Israel. I went to a place to learn and prepare to the army. It was in the Jordan Valley. Then 3 years of the army, I served in Judea and Samaria. I finished and I went to learn in a high biblical school. It was in another place in Benjamin, in Judea. And then I got married and I established my home in Samaria. So the truth is, in the last 22 years almost, I am in Judea and Samaria.
And you told me something interestingly before about your wife is a 3rd generation and your children are 4th generation. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So my journey, as I said, was the places I've decided to learn. When I got married, like a lot of people do now, the decision is not yours anymore, it's your wife's. And one of the things that happened is that my wife indeed is a 3rd generation in Samaria. Her grandmother left the city of Tel Aviv to establish the first community in Samaria, Kdumim. My mother-in-law, her mother, was born and raised in Samaria. My wife was born and raised in Samaria. They moved to the community of Tzufim that they established. And now my kids are the 4th generation in Samaria. I think it's a strong connection, would you say?
It's beautiful, beautiful history. But there's more history to it. I want to go to the biblical history of Judea and Samaria. You mentioned a little bit, Sondra. For the Jewish people, the heartland is so important because of the biblical connection. Can you share why is that?
Well, start with the Bible. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are really universal chapters. And it begins in chapter 12 when God selects Abraham as the beginning of the Jewish people. And what does he say? What is the first thing God says to Abraham? Go forth from your father's home, from your birthplace, from the land of your fathers. Go to the land that I will show you. And right there in Genesis 12, God makes this eternal promise to Abraham, I will give this land to your children. Now, as a child, learning that, even, from the age of 6 or 7, we don't just learn it as a fact in some historical figure way back when, 4,000 years ago. We learn that as Abraham, our forefather. And, later on, Abraham purchases a cave and a field to bury his wife Sarah. And for us, that is the tomb of our patriarchs and matriarchs. So we have this family connection to the land of Israel that's much stronger than just, history or something. And then, of course, we have the prophecies that talk about the return of the people of Israel to the land of Israel. And all of these things, the focus and the center of all of that is in Judea and Samaria. And I just want to bring one more biblical reference, which I think is incredibly meaningful, and that's Ezekiel 36. And in that chapter, Ezekiel speaks to the mountains of Israel. What are the mountains of Israel? The mountains of Judea and Samaria, also the Galilee, but mainly the mountains of Judea and Samaria. And what does he say? Prophesies a time when those areas which would have been barren will come to life again. The trees will shoot forth their branches. The people of Israel will come back to populate those mountains. And when you read a chapter like that, you drive around my community or Shmuel's community or any of the places in Judea and Samaria, you see exactly that. The mountaintops are once again, little by little, being populated by Jewish communities, and what was rocky, barren land now is beautiful flowers and trees, even tulips from Holland. And you look at something like that and you say, this is where the action is. This is where God wants us to be. How can I stay out of this? I want to be part of that.
So the Jewish people have a deep connection to the land, and after all these years in the diaspora, they came back. In 1948, the state was established. Can you share a little bit about the history then? So first, was Judea and Samaria always in the hands of Israel?
Okay, so unfortunately, Israel became a state in 1948, and the Arabs rejected any opportunity for compromise or acceptance. And as soon as Israel became a state, they attacked Israel from all sides. The result of that, a year later, was a ceasefire line, not a border. And that ceasefire line was drawn just based on where the army stopped. And therefore, the area that we refer to as Judea and Samaria today was occupied by Jordan. Now, I may add, illegally occupied by Jordan. They annexed the area. Their annexation was not recognized by any country in the world, with the exception of Great Britain and Pakistan. The Arab League itself didn't even recognize Jordan's annexation of that part of the land. But I have to say, as much as that included most of our historical sites, the old city of Jerusalem, Zion, everyone talks about Zionism, but for all the dreams of Zionism, Mount Zion, right there, the old city of Jerusalem was not in our hands. We would never have started a war to capture that area back, even though this is our strongest connection. But the Arabs attacked us in 1967 from those mountains, and in response to that attack, we went in and captured the area from those people who were our enemies for 19 years.
But then there didn't live Jews yet. So what happened after Israel took the area?
Well, for a time, the government of Israel actually reached out a hand in peace to the Arab nations, and offered to sit down at the negotiating table and actually give them part of the area of Judea and Samaria in exchange for peace. I'm not a fan of that approach, but it was a legitimate approach, and it produced nothing. The Arabs continued in their intransigence, and it was actually a grassroots movement that began initially. Actually, the first communities were established right after the Six-Day War. Jews came back to two places where Jews had lived in modern times that were thrown out by the Arabs. One was in Hebron, and one was in Judea in Kfar Etzion. And that was it. And it was really only after the Yom Kippur War where there became this awakening that no matter what we do and no matter what we offer, we are still being attacked. Well, we might as well start settling our own biblical heartland. And that began in 1975.
Okay, and after that, the Oslo Accords came to be. Can you shortly explain what those were and what is their relevance for today?
Well, the Oslo Accords was actually a pathway to peace where Israel recognized the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. Israel did not advocate the creation of a Palestinian state. The Palestinians did seek that, but this was seen as an interim measure to kind of test the waters. Vast parts of Judea and Samaria were transferred to the control of the Palestinian Authority, and the idea being they would be able to develop the areas, develop relationships with other countries, to have economic development, education, health, all these things for the betterment of the Palestinian people. And Israel would see how it worked. Could we be neighbors? Could we live in peace with one another? For me in particular, living in Samaria, on the one hand I was very frightened by this. On the other hand I said, wow, maybe this will be an opportunity for us in Karnei Shomron to have very nice peaceful relationships with Azun, which is the town closest to us. Unfortunately, the opposite happened. Palestinians took advantage of their control of their areas to create terrorist networks. They became terrorist mini-states. And unfortunately, the result was enormous terrorist attacks against Israelis, both in Judea and Samaria and in cities all over Israel. As a result, finally, in 2003, Israel took back security control of the area. So today, it is really more like an autonomy, where the Palestinian Authority retains control over civilian issues, and Israel retains control over all the security issues. But at the end of the day, I have to say, it has been terribly disappointing. The Palestinians, even to this day, have never invested in any way in the improvement of the lives of their people. All the money that has been poured into the Palestinian Authority, unfortunately, is being used for propaganda against Israel, is being used for terrorism, is being used to support families of terrorists. If that continues to be the attitude of the Palestinian Authority, I have to say the Oslo Accords are completely dead.
So it's a real contested area, we can say. Shmuel, I want to ask you, why would you live in this kind of area where there's so much rumor and so much things happening?
I think the answer is exactly what we started to talk about, this connection to the biblical heartland. Really, if you are insane, if you have something that you care for your family, the criteria to live somewhere will be a safe place, a place near your workplace, a place with some leisure life. None of these are existing in Judea and Samaria. So safety is not. If you read the news and you hear about what happens in Judea and Samaria, stones, they're shooting, stabbing, not every day, not all the time, not everywhere, but it's something that happens in the area. We always need to commute to work, minimum 40, 50, if not an hour or an hour and a half. Your husband drives for an hour and a half to work every day, correct? So you don't have safety, you need to drive far away, and leisure, it's not even an option. We don't have shopping malls, we don't have a lot of things happening to us, just houses, building, and education.
That doesn't sound great.
Exactly, so why would you live there? Because you understand you are a chain in God's prophecy. We had an opportunity that our forefathers dreamed. One day we're going to go back to Israel, we're going to go back to Jerusalem. In Passover, we prayed next year in Jerusalem, and we actually got the opportunity. In 1967, a miracle happened. We were able to defeat countries that were stronger than us, bigger than us, like this. This was a miracle.
So you lived outside of Judea and Samaria before. Would you say it changed you, also your faith, your life, living here in Judea and Samaria?
I think that living in Judea and Samaria teaches you two things. One, you always feel the protection of God. When you know that on every constant moment there are people around you that want you dead. My son drives to school on a bulletproof bus every day. And you understand that the people around us, the surrounding area, looks at us as we need to target them. We need to go against them. And first of all, you need to trust God. Second, you understand how much power and energy the state of Israel is investing in protecting our people. And you see people that are really modern day pioneers. People that have ideology and a belief like nowhere in the world. As I said, criteria to live do not exist there. If somebody lives there, he does it from ideology, from a belief. Great people who believe in God in his country.
But if I hear all these things, I'm really thinking, is it really worth it? All these difficulties you need to get through to have a normal life, bulletproof buses for your children, is it really worth all that effort?
If I would ask my great-grandfather, born in Czechoslovakia, being a rabbi there in the small village, in the small shtetl, right? And I would tell him that one day, not only we will return to our land, we will return to the place that are mentioned in the Bible with the same names, and we're going to have an army, and we're going to have a government, an Israeli state. Would he believe me? He wouldn't. Would he say, you have an opportunity? It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a struggle, but you are building something big that is indeed changing the world. I see it as an opportunity. With every startup company, right, you need to struggle in the beginning, but then something amazing happens. I feel that we are exactly at that moment. This is a startup, but it's a startup that God is the biggest investor. I think it's proving us that we need to live in the country with all the struggles, with all the challenges. Only good is going to come from it in the end.
What I'm interested to know also, we hear all the time about difficulties between Palestinians, Jews living in the area. But I'm curious, do you have contact with any Palestinians?
So I'll tell you this. One of the first question you asked about colonies and another word that's being used is apartheid. I want to tell you the reality. In my community, many of the people who work are actually Arab Palestinians who come. They work in building, they work in the supermarket, they work. When I want to go to their cities, and if you visited Israel and Judea and Samaria, you will see a big red sign to the entrance of their cities saying, it is against the law, and it's a risk to your life as Israeli to enter this town. So while we believe that 95% of the people around us only want to live quietly, make a living, and just live almost in peace, I would say, we have a problem. We have the 5%. The 5% that are not into it. They are challenging us. They want to see us dead. And more than that, they educate their kids to continue the hatred. So we want to connect. We have a lot of connections. I work many of the times, they work for us, we work for them. There is something that's bonding, but there's always a sense of being a bit suspicious because it happened in the past at places that, were business with Israel. One day they wake up and they flipped. Golda Meir said once, peace will come the day they're going to love their kids more than they hate us. And I feel it's a very strong statement. And we live in Judea and Samaria, and we feel it day in and day out.
We also hear these stories of where it's the other way around, So the Jews are attacking Palestinians. These are the news, the messages I hear in the news. What should I think of those? Are those true, or is it all nonsense?
There was a president in the US named Donald Trump. He called the concept of fake news. I'll put it very simple. 2 weeks ago, when we were filming this, we had a terror attack. 2 siblings were murdered a meter away. They were driving in Hawara. They stopped in a traffic jam. Somebody came, shot them in their head. 2 siblings, 19 and 21, the Yaniv family from Arbracha. Just after that, settlers, went with a lot of pain in their heart. And once, it never happens before, but it happens, and they went and they made a mess in the village. They made a mess. They burned some ruined car, and they also burned a house. It was awful. We have a government, we have an army, we have a police. We shouldn't do that. All of the world, including the UN, is going to have special assemblies to talk about the terrors that the settlers did. Let's talk of the context for a second. We are being shot to death. We are being killed every week. There's terror. In the last month and a half, there are 15 casualties, Israelis. So once in a blue moon, there's somebody who burns a car or does a mess. I think when you look at the bigger picture, it's not even starting to be equal. We are constantly living under the fear that somebody is going to shoot us, kill us, or stab us. Sometimes people cannot afford to live with that anymore, and they do something. They do something that all of Israel society is going to go against them. It's not okay. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't be violent, but it's not something to say that it's equal. The problem is the news media, the outlets, they come and they make a big story out this settlers' violence, and they don't even share the context that an hour before 2 siblings were murdered on this main road. I think, look at the bigger picture, look at the actual reality. It's a no-brainer for me.
You mentioned the UN, and I want to go there. I want to look a little bit in the broader perspective, international community, international law. There are a lot of voices in the world who say Israel is occupying Palestinian land and other claims like that. And I want to address 5 questions, and I want you both to address them just in a minute. So I start with Shmuel, and then you can answer the next one, and so forth. So, Shmuel, what would you say if someone say Israel is breaking international law?
According to the international law, we are not occupying the territories. It is indeed, in the legal term, an area in dispute. An area in dispute is something that we should talk about, we should consider, and we should see how we're going to treat. But we had 2 main options in the Oslo Accords and also in Gush Katif when we disembarked from Gaza. 2 times that we did big, massive moves with our territories, both of the times shoot us in their face. With terror, with intifada, with missiles from Gaza. We need to protect our land. That's the main goal and the main concept. We have only one state. That's it.
Okay, clear. Sondra, Israel is an apartheid state. What would you say?
Go to any major city in Israel, particularly in Jerusalem. Go into any hospital, go into any shop, go stop at any bus stop, and you will see Jews and Arabs side by side, working together, studying together, doing business together. There is no apartheid in Israel.
Settlers are colonists.
When you're being thrown away from your father's home for any reason, and you come back to that home, that's where you were born and raised, that's your home. You cannot occupy a place that was yours.
Okay, Judea and Samaria is illegally occupied land.
Judea and Samaria is our original homeland, but even more than that. If you look even under international law, the original documents relating to that was part of the Balfour Declaration, the Treaty of San Remo after that. Set aside all of the land in Israel, including Judea and Samaria, for close Jewish settlement. Nothing that the international community has ever done has ever abrogated the legal validity of that document.
Okay, Shmuel, last one. Jews living at the West Bank is an obstacle to peace.
Yeah, that's true. My son is an obstacle for peace. This is why he needs to drive to school on a bulletproof bus. If you think that our kids are an obstacle for peace, if you think that our life needs to be jeopardized, and that's really, there's somebody from our viewers that think that, he needs to do a very good reality check. We live in the place, the only Jewish state in the world. We came back after 2,000 years. We tried everything to have peace. As I said before, when Israel is going to consider put their guns down, we're going to be destroyed. When they will decide to put their guns down, then we will have peace.
Okay, thank you both. Sondra, you also studied law and know a thing or two about Israel in the international community. Can you share a little bit about the current situation as it stands? So what are the things happening at the moment with Israel in international law?
Well, there was unfortunately a bit of a setback with a resolution that was put forward by President Obama, actually, under the radar. There was an attempt to declare Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria illegal, but it's a farce. It's an absolute farce because this is an area that, as Shmuel mentioned, is contested. And you can't say we cannot be occupiers because we were attacked from this area, and under international law we have every right to be in an area from which we were attacked until a peaceful treaty comes to be that would change that. Add to that the fact that this is our ancestral homeland, that the various the international agreements that set forth the whole idea of a Jewish state, going back to the days following World War I, recognize that this is an integral part of Israel. How can we possibly be considered illegal occupiers?
Well, people are still speaking about this two-state solution. Is it something we really need to consider as a possible option, or is it off the table? What would you say to that?
I think the two-state solution is dead. I think it is dead in Israel, and I think it is dead among the Arab communities as well. If you ask the Palestinian Authority today what they want a one-state solution, and they don't want to have anything to do with Israel, the Jewish people. There is Palestinian leaders for years already have been declaring, we want a Palestinian state. Initially they said only in Judea and Samaria, now they're saying the whole thing. But if you ask them how do they define the Palestinian state, they say we want Judea and Samaria, and we want to throw out every Jew. There are 500,000 Jews today living in Judea and Samaria. If any other people in the world would be threatened with mass expulsion, that would be considered racism. But in the case of Jews who are living in this area, and like Shmuel's family, 4 generations already, living in a place that is legally ours by every definition, how can that be justified, that we can just be expelled? And I see the Palestinians as, from the beginning, adopting the idea of a two-state solution as a subterfuge, as the first step to destroying Israel. Israel itself today understands this is how the Palestinians have viewed it. Every single overture we have made for peace, every single very real withdrawal and sacrifice that we have made for peace has been met at every turn by increased terrorism. And therefore, in Israel, we also say the two-state solution is dead. This will never bring a solution. What is the solution? I don't know. There are many options out there on the table. A conflict that has been going on for more than 100 years is going to take more than a few months to figure out how to solve it.
Shmuel, I want to get to you about this boycott thing we sometimes hear. Oftentimes we hear about boycotts against Israel. Is this something Judea and Samaria has to struggle with also?
So we hear about it in the news, and honestly I feel that in the last 2-3 years it's less as a topic. I think it's a question that it's actually a local question. People in the Netherlands need to ask themselves, what are they doing as a consumer to the fact that their supermarket, for example, put sticker on a product and say, occupied Israel products. For us, I must say that the industries in Israel got damaged from boycotting, because tomatoes are important and grapes are important, but I think more important is all the medical machinery, all the startup companies, basically every R&D, research and development center of all the biggest companies in the world are in Israel. So when you want to boycott our wine, think about boycott the machinery that's going to do your next heart surgery in the hospital. Let's go all the way. So when I look at this, and I think it's a joke, I think it's something that you need to actually go to the street to demonstrate, to go to your officials. There were votes here happening all the time. Go to the official and say to them, it's nonsense, you need to stop that. And I think you're actually doing a lot, especially this organization.
Yes, because why is it so important for instance, Dutch people to buy Israeli products?
So that's exactly as I said. It's a local issue. If you see that the people around you in the surrounding area goes against our product, there is something you can do. You can demonstrate, you can go to your officials, and you can also buy more Israeli products. We are sitting in the Israeli center. When you really can buy and purchase, I'm amazed. It's like an Israeli supermarket. All the products from Israel, and encourage the industry in Israel, and tell them, like what I've learned only a couple of years ago, there are people who love Israel and support Israel. And I think that's the most important point. Because Israelis, they hear about the boycotts, they hear about the BDS, they hear about apartheid week and demonstrations. They don't hear enough about support to Israel, about buying Israeli products, about only special shops that are being built to buy our products. When the people here are going to show and demonstrate this support, I want these voices to echo in Israel. I think it's a great thing.
I want to speak about CFOIC because it's a great work what you're doing. Sondra, you don't only live in Judea and Samaria, but it's actually your life's work to connect Christians with the biblical heartland. Can you maybe explain how that came to be and why it's so important for us Christians to get connected?
How it came to be was totally a God thing. I never would have anticipated. I trained as a lawyer. I was working as a lawyer for a while, and after that I started being involved both as a volunteer and later as a professional advocating for the communities in Judea and Samaria. Fighting an uphill battle every step of the way, talking to journalists who were extremely hostile, talking to groups who were extremely hostile, and being very frustrated. And then every so often I would meet a Christian group. And here I'm like ready to do battle, and I start telling my story, and instead of the usual hostility, I'm getting amen, hallelujah, wonderful. I like, who are these people? And one thing led to another, and it was actually a Christian family who suggested that we set up an organization geared to speaking to Christians about Judea and Samaria. So the reason all of it began was because we in Judea and Samaria were desperately seeking allies, people who, unlike all the UN and the governments and etc., not wanting to boycott Israel, but wanting to support Judea and Samaria. And that's how it began. But after, for a while, and I've been doing this now for 25 years, what I learned as a result of this is that Christians and Jews have, of course we knew this, have a very nasty history. And now we are in a completely new reality. And through my work in connecting Christians to Judea and Samaria, which is so important for us politically and economically, etc., but as well, we became a very important vehicle for a completely new changed relationship, where Christians and Jews today are standing together on the basis of biblical principles that we all share, as opposed to the hatred and anti-Semitism that we experienced for so many centuries.
Well, Shmuel, CFOIC does all kinds of projects, and I'm curious to know what's the most important project right now, you would say?
You cannot ask what's the most important project, because every community has needs. We do not choose where to help. We ask the communities themselves, where can we help you? What is your challenge? And it could be something from education and special needs children, to elders, to security issues, anything possible. And we are only the vehicle to help them, a bridge, just to bring support. Specifically, I'll give you one example. So I'm traveling here in northern part of Netherlands, and I think to my head, when you live in a small town, you're isolated. You can live a very nice, quiet life, right? But there's a problem with young people, teenagers. They're gonna get bored very fast, right? What do? How can you manage the life of somebody who is a teenager and lives in an isolated community? Happens in Samaria and Judea as well. So you want to develop a method to keep them inside this safe community. Don't allow them to go out and party and do nonsense and do crazy stuff. So one of the things in the communities in Judea and Samaria, we have like youth centers, youth community centers that are being built, developed, and organized by the youth. So for example, my community in Sofim, we are right now building one of those centers. You need to give the kids an option. You need to give the teenagers something to do in the afternoon. When you don't do anything productive, you do bad stuff. So I think it's a great and simple way to help them. Take them out of the computer or out of shopping in the shopping mall in the big city. Keep them in the community, make them do good, connect, talk, communicate with their friends. A small, simple thing that can change a community perspective. Just an example.
Sondra, you are now the director of CFOIC, and Shmuel will be in the future. You're not going on a pension, right?
Everybody asked me the same thing. I decided I was going to step down as director coming this September. And Everybody's laughing at me. Sondra, yeah, right. I can just see you sitting back in your rocking chair and knitting. No, I'm not going to do nothing, believe me. I am stepping down and handing over the responsibilities for the overall organization, the administration, the decision-making to Shmuel, who has been working with me now for 5 years. But I will continue doing what I love most and I don't want to ever give up. The relationships that I have built over the years with so many wonderful people all over the world, I will still be around. I will be speaking, I will be teaching, I will be writing, I will be traveling, visiting with people, encouraging them in their love and support for our work in Judea and Samaria. But I don't have to go into the office every day, and I don't have to balance the budgets, and I don't have to do all of that stuff, because thank God Shmuel is going to take over.
Well, Shmuel, as future director of CFOIC, I have one final question for you. What is the hope you have for Judea and Samaria for the near future? We hear all these things about difficulties in the area, but when I speak to you, I sense hope. So can you explain what's your hope for Judea and Samaria?
I'll separate between the hope for Judea and Samaria and the hope for CFOIC, and I think it's connected. I think the biggest problem and the biggest challenge we have is that Judea and Samaria a lot of the times is looked upon of a couple of crazy settlers living on a hill. You imagine a camel, a sheep, and couple of ladies covering their head like Sondra, and people like with big beards. That's settlers, right? This is not the story. We have 500,000 Jewish people living in Judea and Samaria in 70, 80, 100 different communities.
150.
150, you see, from small communities to big cities. We want to have 1 million people living in Judea and Samaria. I think it's one of the best solutions we can have. We have a big piece of land. With everything we talked before about the struggle, about coming, not coming, we have a big piece of land that we need to go and live in. And we have people living in the big cities of Israel yearning for houses. I think the solution is going to be in Judea and Samaria. You hear me? Not the problem, the solution. We will develop housing there, new towns, and also we need to develop industry there and companies. And the startup nation that is Israel in Tel Aviv could also be just as well in Karnei Shomron, in Tzufim, or in Ariel. We need to make Judea and Samaria a legit place. Not from the legal international perspective. With all the respects, I don't care about the UN, but I want Israelis and I want our surrounding area to understand this is a major part, an important part of Israel, which brings me to CFOIC. And I think every person who supports Israel, who thinks about Israel, who prays for Israel, needs to understand what we are doing in the biblical heartland. That's the point of really the struggle in Israel. That's being the modern day pioneers we are. I'm being here for 5 years. It's not me, right? But it's my wife's family, it's Sondra, and it's many other people who made a difficult decision, a challenging decision to live in a place which is not the easiest place to live. But it's the most rewarding, it's the most important, and it's working with God and living a prophecy.
Well, Shmuel, Sondra, I'm very thankful we could have this conversation, and thank you for being here and sharing your story.